Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive on something I think you'll find pretty interesting. Street preaching.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating topic.
We're looking at this excerpt. It's called Evolution and Adaptation of Street Preaching. From Ancient Times to Modern Contexts and Considerations in Nepal.
Okay, so Nepal specifically.
Yeah, and it's written by N.D. Lama. So are you ready to kind of trace the history of street preaching, see how it's evolved over time, and then look at some of the unique considerations in a place like Nepal?
Sounds good to me. Let's jump in.
Okay, so, when you think about street preaching, you might picture, I don't know, like certain modern groups, right?
Yeah, you think of like, I don't know, maybe like a certain image comes to mind.
Exactly. But it might surprise you to learn that this practice goes way, way back. Like we're talking ancient times.
Oh, wow, really? I didn't realize you went back that far.
Yeah, our source takes us all the way back to the Bible. Prophets, apostles, spreading their message in public spaces.
Ah, okay, so like, I mean, even Jesus himself preached in public, right?
Exactly. So it's interesting to think about that historical context.
Yeah, didn't just like appear out of nowhere.
Right. It's been shaped over centuries,
Yeah.
evolving alongside, all these religious and social changes.
Makes sense. So where do we go from those ancient origins?
Well, then we enter the Middle Ages,
Okay.
and we start to encounter the Christian friars.
Those wandering preacher.
Yeah. They took their teachings directly to the people. Kind of like, I don't know, a precursor to modern-day outreach programs.
So, like, breaking down those barriers between, like, religious institutions and just everyday life, huh?
Right. Instead of waiting for people to come to church, they brought religion to the streets, met people where they were.
Interesting approach.
And then, of course, you have the Reformation.
Right, with, like, Martin Luther and John Calvin.
Exactly. They really brought street preaching to the forefront, used it as a powerful tool to challenge the established church, share their ideas directly with the masses.
And Luther especially, I mean, he considered preaching central to Christian faith.
Oh, absolutely. He believed that the clergy's role was to, make Scripture accessible to everyone, not just scholars.
Which is why he was so passionate about translating the Bible into common languages.
Exactly. It's fascinating to see how street preaching often thrives during these periods of upheaval.
Like it provides this platform for, challenging authority and directly engaging with the public.
Bypassing those traditional channels.
Exactly.
And then we get to the Great Awakenings in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Yeah, those were some pretty powerful revivals.
They were. And you had these preachers, these really powerful preachers like George Whitefield and John Wesley. They would draw these huge crowds with their, passionate sermons.
Whitefield especially. I mean, he was known for his dramatic delivery and his ability to really move people, to tears, even fits sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And some newspaper accounts from back then, they claim he could be heard preaching to crowds of, over 30,000 people without any amplification.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's amazing. So it paints this really vivid picture of, the power of street preaching to captivate audiences, almost like a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, it really was in its own right. So how about modern times?
Well, let's fast forward to today, right?
Yeah.
Street preaching is still very much alive, often associated with, evangelical and Pentecostal movements.
Sure. But things have definitely changed.
Absolutely. The landscape has changed drastically.
Our world, especially in cities, it's just saturated with noise. So many distractions.
That's so true. So how has street preaching adapted?
Well, think about it. You see a lot of street preachers now using amplification.
To cut through the clutter.
Exactly. Reach a wider audience.
That shows how dynamic it is, right?
Yeah.
Street preaching, it's rooted in ancient tradition, but it's not static. It adapts.
It has to adapt to survive, adopts new technologies, new methods to stay relevant.
Exactly. But of course, street preaching isn't without its critics. Some people see it as, this cornerstone of free speech and religious expression.
Right. But others find it disruptive, like a public nuisance even.
And that tension raises an important question, for all of us, really. Where do you stand on this issue? Do you see it as a legitimate form of free expression?
Or an unwelcome intrusion into public spaces? I mean, it's a complex debate.
With valid arguments on both sides.
For sure.
And then you have the legal side.
Right.
Because regulations on noise levels, the use of public spaces, they can vary so much from place to place.
What's acceptable in one place might be completely prohibited somewhere else.
And that's where N.D. Lama's focus on Nepal becomes particularly relevant.
Yeah, Nepal, specifically.
Because he highlights this unique aspect of this discussion. Nepal actually has specific laws against religious conversion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it creates a whole other set of challenges for street preachers in that context.
Definitely.
So, I mean, with these legal considerations in Nepal, how does street preaching even navigate this tricky landscape?
Well, that's where Lama's suggestions come in. He's got some really insightful advice for anyone looking to, express their faith in a place like Nepal.
With its unique kind of cultural and legal context.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break down those suggestions. His first point is all about cultural sensitivity.
Yeah. Which sounds pretty obvious.
It does, but it's often overlooked.
It really is.
So what does he mean by that?
Well, he's talking about really understanding and respecting the local culture, the local religious beliefs. You can't just go in with this one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. It's not like a cookie cutter thing.
No, it's crucial to be mindful of the environment you're in and tailor your approach accordingly.
Right, because it's almost like, traveling to a new country without learning any of the local customs.
Exactly.
You might unintentionally offend someone, come across as disrespectful.
Definitely. And that kind of leads into his next point, which is legal awareness.
Oh, right.
Lama stresses how important it is to be, well-informed about the specific laws in Nepal, especially when it comes to, religious expression and conversion.
Yeah, especially given that, conversion efforts are illegal there.
Right. It's not just about being culturally sensitive. It's also about, staying within those legal boundaries.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's his third suggestion?
This one's particularly interesting. He advocates for what he calls a non-confrontational approach.
Okay.
So instead of trying to force your beliefs on others or getting into these heated debates, the focus should be on, sharing your faith in a way that's open and respectful.
So it's more about fostering dialogue, understanding.
Yeah. Rather than, trying to win an argument or convert someone on the spot.
Right, building bridges rather than creating division.
Exactly. And that actually ties in really well with his next suggestion, which is interfaith dialogue.
Oh, interesting.
Lama sees this as a really constructive way to engage with people of different faiths, share perspectives, and just foster mutual respect and understanding.
Yeah, I really love that idea. It's about recognizing that we can learn from each other.
Absolutely.
Even if our beliefs differ.
Exactly. It's about finding that common ground, building relationships. And his next point, he highlights the power of community service.
Oh, okay.
As a way to, express one's faith. He believes that actions often speak louder than words.
So instead of just talking about your faith, you're actually demonstrating those values through your actions.
Exactly. Like helping those in need, contributing to your community in meaningful ways.
Right. Living your faith, letting your actions reflect your beliefs.
Exactly. And finally, he suggests that, as an alternative to public preaching, maybe consider private gatherings.
Okay.
This way, people can choose to attend, they can engage in a more intimate setting, more controlled.
Where they feel comfortable asking questions.
Exactly. And exploring those different beliefs without feeling, pressured or put on the spot.
Right.
It creates a space for deeper conversations, more personalized interactions.
So looking at all these suggestions together, it seems like it's a pretty nuanced approach.
It is.
To religious expression, especially in a place like Nepal.
Right, with its diverse and sometimes sensitive, cultural and legal landscape.
It's about, finding those ways to share your faith authentically while respecting the context.
Yeah, and avoiding things that might be considered offensive or even illegal.
Right. It's a delicate balance. But Lama's insights really do provide, valuable guidance for navigating all these complexities.
They really do.
That was stepping back for a second. What does all this tell us about street preaching in general?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
No, definitely not.
The way it's practiced, the messages that are shared, even its legality, it all depends so much on the specific context.
That's a key takeaway here. Street preaching isn't this monolithic entity. It takes on different forms, different meanings, depending on the culture, the social and legal landscape.
And that's where that historical perspective we talked about earlier really comes into play.
It does.
Because understanding how street preaching has evolved over time, how it's adapted to different periods, different societal shifts, I mean, it helps us appreciate its complexity, its nuance.
It's like piecing together a puzzle.
It is.
You have all these different pieces representing traditions, social change, legal constraints, individual expression.
And they all come together to create this bigger picture.
Exactly.
And you can't really understand the meaning of the whole without considering each of those individual pieces.
And how they connect to each other.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating about Lama's work is that it challenges us to think beyond our own immediate context. He encourages us to consider how something like street preaching, which might seem commonplace in some parts of the world, it can take on entirely different meanings, different implications in a place like Nepal.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, the world is full of different perspectives.
Yeah.
And what's considered acceptable or effective in one culture might not be in another.
Absolutely. It's a call for empathy, for understanding, a willingness to engage with those differences in a way that's respectful and meaningful. And ultimately, that's what makes this deep dive so enriching. It's not just about street preaching as this practice. It's about how we navigate this really intricate relationship between faith, culture, and free expression in a world that's, increasingly interconnected.
It really feels like this whole deep dive has just opened up more questions than answers.
I know, right?
Which isn't a bad thing.
No, not at all.
It sparked this real curiosity about how faith kind of interacts with public life.
Yeah, in so many different ways.
And it makes you think, like, what other forms of religious expression have also had to adapt, to these changing social norms that we see over time.
That's such a good point. Like, think about religious music.
Oh, yeah.
How it's evolved, or the changes we've seen in, like, religious art and architecture.
It's true. All of those, they all reflect those broader, like, cultural and societal changes.
And how faith is always trying to, stay relevant, stay meaningful within those evolving contexts.
It's this constant interplay between faith and society, It never really stops.
It's a dynamic process. It requires individuals and communities to re-examine, their beliefs, their practices, and how they engage with the world around them. And Lama's insights into street preaching in Nepal, they offer such a powerful example of this.
They do. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to this one question. How can we, as individuals and as a society, strike that balance, that delicate balance between our right to share our beliefs, but also the need to respect different cultures and legal systems? It's a question that goes way beyond just street preaching.
It really does. It's something that needs ongoing dialogue, empathy, a willingness to listen and learn from each other. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like, that's what's at the heart of this whole, knowledge-seeking thing, exploring those different perspectives, wrestling with those complex questions, embracing those nuances that make our world so fascinating.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of street preaching.
Yeah, this was great.
We hope you've learned a thing or two along the way.
You can gain some new perspectives.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.